All right. Thank you all for being here. The festival continues on. In just a moment, on stage will be Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan in conversation with MinnPost reporter Peter Callaghan. People have already filled in front. That's wonderful. Before I hand things over, I do want to give our additional thanks to all of our MinnPost Festival sponsors, our supporters. Thank you so much. Who here has a tote bag? We got a lot of tote bags? Okay, good. I love to see the tote bags. If you're a member and haven't picked up your tote bag, make sure you do it. If you're not a member, go ahead and click that donate button. Become one today, get your tote bag, and thank you for your support. Our featured guest for this session is Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor, a member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, and currently the country's highest-ranking Native women elected to executive office. Moderating the conversation is MinnPost's own Peter Callaghan, who just celebrated 10 years at MinnPost. Yeah. There we go. Please join me in welcoming them to the MinnPost Festival stage.
Well, here we are. This is not the Timberwolves one, in case that's what you're looking for. But we are going to talk about the Timberwolves the whole time, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
No, you're not on?
The winners. Yeah. Yes, we are. Right. And I'm glad that that I am here with you because I have a lot of questions for the CEO of the Timberwolves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I would just say, Naz Reid, we can't lose him. So, all right.
Hands off.
That's all I got.
Okay, so Tanner did a little bit of an introduction, and sometimes say no introduction is necessary, but of course they are. And so just quickly run through a very lengthy resume for someone of your tender years. Born and raised in St. Louis Park, okay. University of Minnesota graduate in American Indian Studies and Child Psychology. Father was Marvin Manypenny, mother Patricia Flanagan. Organizer and mentor with Wellstone Action. Youngest member, is this still true, of the Minneapolis School Board?
I don't think it's still true.
Okay, but it was.
Yeah, but it was.
It was.
I used
you
to
can
be
never
young.
take that away from you.
That's right.
And the first state director of the Children's Defense Fund, which we'll talk about a little later, state legislator, lieutenant governor, and just maybe, depending on the breaks, the first female and person of color governor of the state of Minnesota. And apparently you don't want to talk about that much.
I mean, there's a lot of work that we have to do over the next 38 days to make that a reality.
Okay, so we can't talk about that. So there's a question I've always wondered is, why is a city in Minnesota named for St. Louis? Why is that?
So that's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you a fun fact about St. Louis Park. First of all, where are my St. Louis Park people? I love it. Yes. We are very proud of St. Louis Park. But one of the fun facts about St. Louis Park is that wherever you live in the city, you are in walking distance to a local park. And so that may not have exactly the reason why it's named St. Louis Park, but that's my own theory. And I'm sure there's someone in here in the MinnPost audience who absolutely knows why St. Louis Park is named St. Louis Park.
Anybody want to try? Because I do know the answer. This was a total sandbag on my part. I believe it's named for the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad. And
there you go.
Was the terminus.
Now I know. I learned something new every day.
Of which the railroad had the delightful nickname, the Tootin' Louie.
I'm going to leave that alone.
Okay. This is like a middle school audience.
100%. I love it. You're my people.
All right. Quasi-serious. Your father was Ojibwe. Mother, Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
That's a good combination. How did those two influences come to make Peggy Flanagan?
Well, it's a fiery combination,
yes.
too. And I like to say I'm O''Ojibwe. right? So my mom and dad actually met at the Detox. They both worked there, to be clear, on Chicago Avenue. My grandmother actually introduced them. And they were, there's a picture of my parents, and I should share it on my social media so that folks can see this so you can fully appreciate their vibe. It is my dad, and he's got these like aviator sunglasses on and this denim jacket and a white t-shirt. And my mom has this like faux fur jacket with like, I didn't look anything like my mom. She had very, very long blonde hair and super skinny. And my parents were standing in front of their Chevette, their like bright red Chevette, like stone cold, just like looking super cool. And I was like, Mom, this is the coolest you've ever looked in your life. But they were together for about 9 years, and I didn't grow up with my dad. I was really lucky, and I'm one of the, I think, few Native folks who was able to reconnect with my dad. He said, my girl, it's a good thing I wasn't in your life until I got healthy and sober. And I got the benefit of having my dad when he was ready to be my dad. My mom was raised, well, I was raised in a household where we just had women who just did the work. My grandmother was involved in electoral politics in the DFL before it was fashionable for women to be engaged and involved. And she moved to Washington, D.C., and then my mom quickly followed her after she graduated from high school to work on Humphrey's presidential race in 1968. And so that was like, we are DFLers, it is part of our identity. And then my dad was like, he didn't vote until I was on the ballot. And he was like, my girl, you know, I think you have to burn the system down. You think you can change it from the inside out. We need both. And so what you get is me. I've lost both of my parents. My dad in January of 2020, and then my mom on November 18th of 2022, shortly after the election. But my mom knew that we won. She knew that we had a trifecta. And I am so grateful that I get to do this work every day and to try to live out their legacy. But also, I've been missing my mom so much lately because she would be so excited about this election. And I get a lot fewer critiques these days. Because every time I was on Almanac, my phone would immediately ring as soon as it was done, and she'd be like, you look great, you should have said this, blah, 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 right? I'm so grateful that they are my parents. Thank you for asking about both of them.
You mentioned this, and I kind of want to push it one step further. Your father seemed like kind of a pain in the ass, and I say that in a good way.
100%, yes. Yeah, he was.
Gave it to the tribal governments as much as he gave it to the white governments, very opinionated. And that's a tactic. It's not one you tend to use.
It is not one I tend to use. I have been on the receiving end sometimes of my dad's being a pain in the ass. And it's all right, because I think it made me a better leader. I would say, you know, my dad, he was a hellraiser for sure. But also cared so much about making sure, especially that our young Anishinaabe people have access to their culture and identity, and that was incredibly important to him. And you know, he ran for tribal council many times. And after he died, we found this pamphlet from his campaign, where what was written on the front of it, and there was this like photo that seemed like he had it taken at like Olin Mills or something, like just very, I was like, that is the classiest my dad has ever looked. And it said, the right to govern ourselves is inherently ours. And that is something that I absolutely carry with me, and I think about all the time, especially this year in this election. But there are two reactions when people find out who my dad is. Only two. The first being, "Oh, Marvin's your dad." The second one being, "Oh, Marvin's your dad." Like, there's like nothing in between. And my favorite thing is when I'm in community and people say, "Oh, you're Marvin's girl. You look just like him." Yeah.
So you do talk a lot about in sort of politics and in governing your experiences growing up in St. Louis Park. Raised by a single mother, who sought and received help from various government programs.
Public programs.
Public education through college. Obviously that colors your perceptions about the benefits of government. But does it also give you the ability to critique programs and to see what makes them better? And if you can think of an example, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, so my mom moved us to the community of St. Louis Park when I was just a baby, using a Section 8 housing voucher. So she picked St. Louis Park specifically because she knew that we would have access to a really strong neighborhood and community, great public schools, and I have been able to, benefit from that investment. And it's one of the things that I used to really shy away from talking about. As a kid who grew up with a different colored lunch ticket, I was used to making myself as small as possible sometimes, but that didn't serve me or other people who, frankly, have also been through something similar. And so when I got to Children's Defense Fund, I was like, oh, I am here and at these tables advocating for other kids just like me and the family I was raised in. So, the Child Care Assistance Program allowed my mom to go back, to school. We relied on SNAP, which back in the day we called food stamps, and I am sitting in front of you alive today as a kid who had really bad asthma because of access to medical assistance. And all of those things then helped lift my family into the middle class. My mom went to St. Kate's and she got her associate's degree in phlebotomy. And that was, that made a tremendous difference for our family. So we've really leaned in there because I think so often we hear conversations at the Capitol and, folks talk about those people. But I am those people, and those people, right, should have a seat at the table and can talk about some of those programs. I think one of the things that we do is we make it really hard for people to be poor or low income. And, one of the things that we did to improve, the programming around MFIP is that you only have to re-up, right, once a year instead of every 6 months filling out this paperwork, which is basically like filing your taxes. And for families who are already doing their best, I think that makes a big difference. And I would just say one of the things that we miss is that when we pass policies, if we are not actually in relationship or conversation with the people who are directly impacted by these policies, we're not doing it right. And when I was in the legislature, I was surprised by how often someone would say, oh, I introduced this bill, and it was like, oh, who did you talk to? Oh, nobody. I just thought it was a great idea. And so I think those are things that are helpful for us when we do this work, is to hear directly from folks about how their lives are impacted, and then try to make sure that that's part of how we implement, these policies.
Okay. And what's it like being married to a journalist? I hear it's a living hell.
Wow. So this is an unexpected question. So do you know who I'm?
The first.
Yeah.
Unexpected question.
Yes. Do you all know who I'm married to? I'm married to Tom Weber, formerly of NPR, and I know, and I hear it on the road all the time. People are like, "Oh, so you're the one who took my Tom Weber away from me?" And they're like, "Well, I hope it's worth it." Right? Legitimately, across the state, this is what I hear. I'm a really nice partner and wife. I want to be clear. So he's, it is, I got to marry my local celebrity crush.
Wow.
We just...
Tom Hauser wasn't available.
I've literally had people say, like, oh, congratulations to you and Tom Cran. And I'm like, the other one. But no, we've been married for 5 years, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary on September 14th. We were married on the shores of Lake Pepin at Wakuta Beach in our friend's backyard, and all 4 of our parents were able to be there, and it was really wonderful. And when we got married, we didn't know that we would be stuck in the house together during COVID. So it turns out we really like each other and have stayed married. But being married to a journalist means that we have a lot of intense conversations all of the time. But I also I love it. Yeah. And when Tom talks to Siobhan, to our daughter, he'll be like, well, that's a great question. That's a journalist question, right? What's another question you could ask? And she's like, I'm just trying to do my homework, Tom, right? So, but it's an adventure.
Yeah, it's great. We're problem pointer-outers, not problem solvers.
100%.
It's really,
100%.
It's harder than it seems.
That's right. But he's an introvert. I'm not. So that is the dance that we dance. But okay. We're still. I am completely head over heels for my husband, and I still have a great big crush on him. Okay. Yeah.
This is just a. You can applaud that. That's nice. This is an awkward segue because I'm now going back to something serious. You really, since almost you worked on Indigenous education. I mean, from college forward, on the school board, and as a legislator and as lieutenant governor, both curriculum and individual achievement, which is more important maybe. And I wanted to know what you think over that spread of time has been accomplished, what gains have been made through your own work or from others, and what is left to do because you've still got lots and lots of issues.
For sure. So I didn't have a teacher who looked like me until I was in college. And I walked into Indigenous Culture and History 101, and I saw Dr. Brenda Child, who some of you may know, of the Red Lake Nation, in the front of the room. It changed everything for me. I suddenly became a sponge. I took graduate level coursework for fun, and it meant so much to have someone who understood where I came from and my identity at the front of the room. And so I know what a difference that makes to achievement when we have more teachers, right, who reflect the students that they teach. And I think that we have seen more teachers that are now going through the pipeline. We have additional programs, and I think that matters, and it's an important investment. The memorandum of agreement that was signed into law at the Minneapolis Board of Education when I was a member in 2006 was really powerful. That has been re-upped several times. But I also think we absolutely have more work to do. Indigenous Education for All is a policy that was passed that is now being implemented. Our young people, all of our young people, Native and non-Native, should know, their history on whose land they live. And I think it's a benefit to everyone. And I think that's something that Governor Walz and I absolutely share. But there's more to do. And the thing that I think is incredibly important that we don't talk about enough is the actual relationship between a teacher and a student. That is where the magic happens, and that is where the work gets done. And that has been my own educational experience, and I think that is where we have to do more investing. One of the things I am incredibly excited about is the BAR initiative, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but the BAR program is in several schools across the country. It is something that works in blue states and red states, blue communities and red communities, and is all about making sure that our young people, our students, are supported by their teachers. That relationship is central, but also the support and relationship for the other teachers, right, in the district and school. So it essentially forms like a net so that nobody can fall through the cracks. The rates of attendance go way up. Kids who are falling behind or who are failing, that number goes way down, and we're seeing results. And we're seeing results in communities like Detroit Lakes, which have a high number of Native students, and those gaps are closing. We should invest in the things that we know work. We have had several pilots of this program across the state, and it's something I'm really excited about and I think can help us along. And incidentally, and this is not why I like the program, but it was started by my high school guidance counselor, Angela Jerabek, who absolutely is why I went to college. And so I see, again, just the value of how powerful it is to focus on those relationships and allow teachers to be able to do their job and teach and make those connections.
Okay. I'm not from here.
I'm sorry.
And so I get here and I go to a DFL event after a couple of years, and there's this guy with a ukulele, and he's singing a song that is essentially a Paul Wellstone stump speech. It's called We All Do Better When We All Do Better. And that's when I first sort of came across this sort of patron saint nature of Paul Wellstone, and it's really part of your political origin story, at least. So tell the uninitiated a little bit why this person is still so much a part of DFL politics and DFL governing in the state, and then tell me what the Wellstone Triangle is.
Ooh, this is like a quiz. I know what the Wellstone Triangle is, but I'll say that till the end. So I don't know about you, but like I feel Paul so much right now, like in this moment that we are experiencing in this country. And I was going to be an early childhood special education teacher. And then my senior year of college at the U, I worked for Senator Wellstone. And everything changed. Was literally driving past the Wellstone for Senate office. And I was like, you know what? I really like Paul Wellstone. I'm going to stop. And I went in and like 7 people said, are you here to volunteer? Welcome. And I was like, I guess, sure. And I stuffed envelopes with complete strangers for 2 hours. And I was like, this is so fun. And we don't stuff a lot of envelopes anymore. But
the paper cuts are
that's right. Lots of paper cuts, liability. But and then I went back almost every day and ended up at the end of the campaign leading our urban native organizing work. I was so fortunate to be taken under the wing of folks like Pam Costain, the amazing Jeff Blodgett, Dan Kramer, Alana Peterson, all these folks who saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself, and gave me lots of opportunities to organize, lots of opportunities to work on campaigns, to start training, and that training is where I met our now governor, Tim Walz. And it is the magic, I think, of people feeling connected to something that is bigger than themselves. Paul represented for so many of us, like he was our guy, right? He was an honorary member of Red Lake and Leech Lake. We don't give that to just anybody, right? And it's because he showed up. And one of my favorite things about Paul Wellstone is that even if you didn't agree with him, people are like, oh, son of a gun, I just really like that guy, right? And that was the magic of Senator Wellstone, because he would show up and he would listen to people, and folks just really felt valued and heard. That is why I think even people who again, didn't agree with him, or when I meet, the last time I saw John Lewis, and I was like, Mr. Lewis, I work, for Wellstone Action, and he was like, oh, let me tell you about Paul, right? And like, that is a power that he just had over everyone. And now, so many of us who grew up on the Wellstone for Senate campaign are now lieutenant governors, including Garland Gilchrist of Michigan, our mayors like Melvin Carter, or our graduates of Camp Wellstone, like our next vice president, Tim Walz. And I just feel him all the time and see him shining down on all of us. And that story, and Dave Wellstone pulling out the green bus, it's right on time. So I am, he's here. And I remember after he passed away, I had this dream. And I was, as many of us were, completely distraught and heartbroken. And he was in a gymnasium. I can't believe I'm telling this story, but I am. And he was under, the doctor is in, one of those, from the Peanuts with Lucy sitting under it. And I said, what do we do? What are we going to do? And he said, just keep going forward. Just keep going. And I think about that, now, so many of us just kept going. And even under the darkest times of the Trump presidency, we were called to just keep going. And I think that is this moment. Okay, the Wellstone Triangle.
You thought I was going to forget.
No, I have talked about this many, many times all across the country. So the Wellstone Triangle isn't this thing where Senator Wellstone was like, this is the Wellstone Triangle, right? It's what he showed us, which is that it was good public policy, strong community organizations, and electoral politics. And when politics works well, or when we have a movement that works well, all three of those things are working together, because you have elected officials who come from those grassroots organizations, right, who run for office, who are still in relationship with those organizations as they are passing and moving policy that is informed and good for people's lives. So that is the Wellstone Triangle. Dean, did I get it? Okay, awesome.
People might not know that there's a children's book based on you, and I want to know how many copies you have.
Several. So there's a couple. I wish they would have checked in with me, because there's a couple things in there I'm like, okay. But
are you saying they were embellished?
There's just a couple. It's custom spellings, a couple things, but it's pretty great. And my daughter, though, is totally over it. She's like, yeah, we have the book. Right. But my favorite part of that book is one of the drawings by Tasha Hart, who's amazing. And it's a picture or a drawing of me and my dad. And my dad was an amputee, and he's standing up in the drawing, and we're arm in arm together, and it's really, really beautiful. So it's a book. If you want me to fact check it with you, I'm happy to do that. But the best part is that image.
I want to talk about your work, because I went back to look at what you did when you were with the Children's Defense Fund. And you took that job, I think, just as after the marriage amendment campaign, I think it was 2013, the Democrats had just achieved something called a trifecta. And one of the things you worked on was increasing the minimum wage and indexing the minimum wage. And I want you to talk a little bit about that campaign, but also what I see as a theme to this day, where with MFIP and with child tax credits and with child care credits, that there seems to be a theme of a way to increase outcomes is to increase incomes of these families. And it starts, I think, with the Children's Defense Fund. Could you describe that a little bit for me?
Yes.
And
so
them too. I'll listen.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for our tagline, which is when you increase family income, you improve child outcomes, which is just true because data. You get it. But I was a brand new mom when I took that job. And Marian Wright Edelman called me. And she's like, "Hi, this is Marian Wright Edelman." And I literally said, "Shut up, who is this?" And she was like, "This is Mrs. Edelman." And I was like, "Hello, Mrs. Edelman." And she said, "I would love to recruit you to run the Children's Defense Fund in Minnesota." And I was like, "You don't even know me." And she said, "Oh, I know all about you. I've been looking into you." And I was like, "Okay." I said, "Well, Mrs. Edelman, I'm so flattered, but I just had a baby. I love my work at Wellstone Action, and but I am happy to help you find somebody." And she said, "Well, why don't you just come visit with me?" And I said, "Okay, I can do that." So I went to Washington with Siobhan, with my baby. And we visited, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to run Children's Defense Fund in Minnesota." And it was through that organization that, as a kid with a different colored lunch ticket, I was able to sit up straight, take up space, and feel a real responsibility for family economic security for families all across Minnesota. Working on the minimum wage was one of the most important things that I have ever done in my life. And we were able to, and not all trifectas are created equally.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Great. So that's a preview. But at that time, right, we had a DFL House, Senate, and Governor's office, and we had to fight like all get out to keep indexing to the minimum, attached to the minimum wage. And thank goodness we did, right? Because it was $6.15 at the time. It's now $10.65. And, we have more to do there. But what I know is that all of those programs help us not to just strengthen Minnesota's economy, but also to create a future where kids have opportunity and their families do. And having those two-generation strategies, I think, is what sets Minnesota apart and makes us unique. As we talk about making Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family, that's exactly what we mean. And I felt so privileged to be able to do that, but it also was good organizing work. It was over 70 organizations, faith, labor, and nonprofits working together to move this policy, and then that built the infrastructure for so much of the work that we were able to just get done in 2023 and 2024. Things like paid family and medical leave, which started, that coalition launched when I still had a baby on my hip, and we passed it when my kid was 10 years old, right? But we kept coming back to, right, like, how do we refine these policies? How do we make them better? How do we organize a broader base of support? That is my training ground for much of that was at CDF.
Okay. Let's talk about that first trifecta, or the more recent trifecta. Those are huge majorities. The House had 12 seats. The Senate had 11 seats. That would make the Speaker and the Majority Leader very happy compared to what they worked with.
Right.
Why did that trifecta underperform the way it did? I mean, they weren't even able to lift the sunset on the provider tax that was 7 or 8 years in the future that handed Paul Gazelka a fairly big club in his bargaining with y'all on that budget.
It sure did. So here's, I think in that moment, Democrats were playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And in that moment, many of us who are now at the table, right, as elected officials, and former Representative Betty Folliard knows a little something about that, who's in the front row here. And I think many of us who were advocates during that time are now decision makers. And what I heard on the campaign trail, right, and what many of our legislators heard was that people wanted us to do the thing that we told them we were going to do. And so folks said, like, oh, you did so much. I was like, yes, but it shouldn't have been a surprise. Codifying access to abortion, paid family and medical leave, historic investments in infrastructure and education, a child tax credit, these are all things that we told people we were going to do. So we should probably do them and honor that commitment that we made to people in the community and on the doors. And, you know, one of the other things that I would say is, you know, a one-seat majority. What's a one-seat majority? A majority, that's right. And, you know, Governor Walz often says, right, that you have political capital so you can spend it, not just to bank it. And we wanted to run as hard and as fast as we could to get things done for Minnesotans, and we were able to do that. And I'm really proud of that work.
Well, almost conversely, a one-seat majority is sometimes easier to hold. Yeah. Because you don't have 10 people each time wanting off on the vote. No one can get off on the vote, and it maybe is counterintuitive, but it might be easier to have held those majorities with tiny majorities. No?
Potentially, but I'd love a little extra cushion there, everybody, right? Like that's why we got 38 days to build in that cushion. Okay. But I also know this: we also have governed when we've had a trifecta and when we haven't, and I think Minnesotans just expect us to get work done and to work across the aisle together, regardless of who is in power. You know, when I was at CDF, that was a really important lesson for me, which is that 2 years in the life of a child is a really long time. And so if I needed to work with a Republican Speaker of the House and Republican members, I was going to do that because our kids needed it, frankly. And for the first many years of our term, we had divided government, and we still got things done for Minnesotans because that's what all of you expect, and that should be how we work together. I know that later there will be a panel on with Michael Broadcorp and former Senator Benson, and I wish I could stay for that because Senator Benson was someone that I really enjoyed working with on behalf of children and families, and I wish she was still there. I think she'd be a really important voice that is needed in this moment.
Okay, take a step back. It's late 2017. You're in the State House. You apparently thought that perhaps there might be a vacancy in Congress if Keith Ellison decided to do something else. And you get a call or a contact from this guy from Mankato who wants you to join this ticket. Can you describe that meeting or maybe a series of meetings and how that approach happened? And secondly, did your friends think you were crazy? Because he was not the choice of Twin Cities progressives.
So Tim Walz and I have been friends for a long time. He was my camper at Camp Wellstone. I was his trainer in 2005, and he walked into the room in jeans and a T-shirt and tennis shoes, and was like, "I'm Tim Walz, and I want to run for Congress in the 1st Congressional District." And I was like, "As a Democrat?" And he's like, "Yeah." And we're like, "Okay, good luck, right? And come on in." And thought like, who is this guy, right? And then by the end of the training, I was like, who is this guy? And I went down to Mankato and I knocked on doors in a community where I didn't live because I believed so much in him. And so yeah, we've been friends for a long time. So in 2017, he was like, "Hey, I would love to come talk to you about the things that you're working on, paid family medical leave and childcare." I was like, "Oh, that's my love language. Come on in, right? We'll talk about those things." And we were in my office in the state office building. And he's like, "I also want to talk to you about like my, pick for lieutenant governor." I was like, "Oh, great." I was like, "I have some ideas and I have a list." So towards the end of our, conversation about family economic security, he was like, "Well, I'd love to tell you about it." I was like, "Great, who is it?" And he was like, "It's you." And I was like, "Shut up." "Who is it?" He's like, "No, it's you." I was like, "Well, now this conversation has turned explicitly political, and we can't have it here in the state office building. You have to go." So he said, "Okay." And I said, "But you've given me a lot to think about." So I immediately called Tina Smith. and who has been my friend and mentor for a very long time. And I said, I have to talk to you about something confidentially. And she said, well, come over tomorrow, put on a pot of coffee, we'll take a walk around the lake. And we had a very long conversation about the possibilities, about the risks. I was starting my career in the legislature and was really hopeful about what would be possible there, and it was a risk to join this ticket. But I also thought about the benefits. We did something very different, right, which was launched our campaign a full year before Election Day, because we wanted people to know what they were going to get, right? You've got this, veteran from the Army National Guard with over 20 years of service, a coach, a teacher, someone who represented the 9th largest agricultural district in the country, and then a suburban mom, a nonprofit executive, a Native woman, an organizer and advocate. And I thought, this is something that Minnesotans can really get behind and see themselves reflected in our leadership. And it wasn't lost on me, and I don't, that we hadn't had a Native woman in this role before, and that was also important. And so, what a ride, what an adventure, and it was absolutely worth the risk. But here's the deal: everyone is learning more and more about Tim Walz right now, but so many things that we already know. The question I get asked most frequently is he really like that? And I'm like, yeah, right? Where I have had, no kidding, something wrong with my car. It's making a noise, right? And he's like, hey, why don't you hold up the phone next to the engine? And I was like, okay. And he's like, all right, it sounds like the such and such. I don't know. He could have said flux capacitor and I wouldn't have known, right? And he said, this is a part that you're going to get at Napa. Call me and I'll tell you how to put it in. And I was like, so that is who he is. And the whole country is getting to learn more about him. And if I'm being honest, I have a little FOMO as a fear of missing out as I see him and the vice president traveling across the country. But I also know that there is no one better suited to be the partner for a strong woman leader. And that she was really smart for picking him. Yeah.
You might be the next governor of the state of Minnesota. Now, I mean this, and I mean this year, not in 2026. And I know you don't want to go there, but there will be no campaign, there'll be no vetting of you, there'll be no vote for you, there will be no choice by voters. Don't they deserve some description and some understanding of how a Flanagan administration might differ from a Walz administration, and what might that look like?
So I think that over the last 6 years, working literally shoulder to shoulder with Governor Walz has demonstrated for Minnesotans how I think about leadership and priorities. We literally have a table in our cabinet room in the governor's office where the governor and I sit side by side at the head of the table. We have interviewed and hired all of our commissioners together. The overwhelming majority of the judges and people that we have appointed, we have done so together. And whenever we put together our budget and policies, we are side by side. And it might not surprise you to know that I like to really get in the weeds of a lot of those policies. I'm a policy nerd. I'm guessing you all are my people. But that has been the work that I've done and the training ground, frankly, for whatever might be next. The things that I think about a lot, regardless of what my job will be in 2025, is implementation of all of the things that we just got done. I care tremendously about good governance. It is not a sexy thing to talk about, but it really, really matters, and it really matters in this moment in particular, where we are so divided and there's so much distrust. I think about paid family and medical leave, which is an entire program that we have to build. And the goal of that is to make sure that a new parent who comes home with a baby who's totally freaked out, right, and is like, I
can't... The mom or the baby?
That's right. Well, yes, right? But, who's just thinking, and this is, a little bit what I thought. I was like, how on earth did they let me leave the hospital with this baby, right? And Siobhan's dad was like, well, didn't you major in child development? I was like, well, yeah, I know when she's supposed to have object permanence, right? But but all that being said, I want that new mom to come home, and as she is totally overwhelmed with this amazing baby, that she doesn't have to think at all about whether or not there's going to be money in her bank account to pay her bills. And it's a tall order, but it also is what is expected of us. So, I will absolutely do everything I can to introduce more Minnesotans to their lieutenant governor and to talk about the work that I've been able to do in partnership with Governor Walz. But I can tell you this, one difference between us, I've got more hair and he's taller.
Yeah, I've noticed. Last question is, do you like buffalo plaid? And secondly, I was going to make a proposal that this is what's called wolf tartan from Scotland, and I think that might be a better choice.
First of all, I do actually like buffalo plaid. The governor bought me a buffalo plaid Pendleton jacket so that we could be twinsies. And I love it. And at the end of the 2018 campaign season, I was like, we're just going to put this away for just a little bit, right? It was a lot of buffalo plaid. But it has been, or Bemidji plaid, right, which is, for our friends at Bemidji. It is something that I have turned into fashion, right? I've got ribbon skirts. The incredible Samantha Ray from Project Runway made me a beautiful dress for my inauguration. I can work it, but boy, could I work this. Yeah. So Peter, thank you for this fashion consultation. I really like it.
For your mom?
Yeah, it's good.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's
okay,
good.
we're going to end it there.
Nice work.
Can you, thanks.
Thank you.